The frozen earth had become like concrete beneath the American sergeant's prone body. Through the jagged remains of what once served bread to French families, he peered into the darkness before sunrise. Coal bucket helmets moved between the shadows. Machine pistols glinted in the dim light. His fingers had lost feeling hours ago from clutching the wooden grip of his heavy machine gun. 16 hours had passed without movement. The words he would send home to Illinois echoed through his exhausted mind. Wave after wave kept advancing toward his position. He had lost track after bringing down the 40th enemy soldier. These weren't ordinary troops stumbling through the rubble. These were hardened veterans from elite divisions that had battled across North Africa and survived the Normandy landings. Their destination was the command headquarters of his battalion. They had no idea what stood between them and victory. One American with thick spectacles and vision so poor it nearly prevented his combat service. A man who simply refused to give ground. The next 48 hours would witness something that military historians still struggle to explain. A former coal digger from the American Midwest would face elements from two crack German divisions. He would kill dozens of enemy soldiers. He would wound countless others. Single-handedly, he would prevent the collapse of an entire section of Allied defenses during the enemy's final major push on the Western battlefront. This extraordinary story had begun 5 days before. German forces had launched their last desperate gamble to recapture territory and divide the Allied armies. The operation carried a code name that reflected winter's harsh bite. Hitler personally demanded this offensive, convinced that a crushing blow while Americans battled elsewhere could reverse Germany's failing fortunes. A small town in Alsace sat directly in the German path. Strategic value came not from size, but location. Control of this crossroads meant control of supply routes that could funnel entire armies toward their objectives. American forces had to maintain their grip or watch their entire defensive line crumble. Among the defenders stood a 28-year-old master sergeant whose parents had immigrated from Italy. He had grown up during economic collapse in Illinois. His father worked the dangerous mines. His mother's early death had sent him and 8 brothers and sisters to an institution for orphaned children. Before the war arrived, this sergeant had labored in coal mines and driven trucks for wages. When Pearl Harbor brought America into the conflict, he rushed to volunteer, only to face rejection due to failing eyesight. The military doctor in Chicago had spoken plainly. Poor vision made him unsuitable for combat duty, but the future sergeant refused limited service. He enlisted anyway, accepting kitchen duty while constantly requesting transfer to fighting units. Army casualties from the invasion of Europe and subsequent campaigns created desperate need for infantry replacements. Previous medical restrictions were reconsidered. The determined Cook was among the first reassigned. He joined a rifle company in a regiment that belonged to a division famous from the previous World War. After months of combat through France, his weak eyes had proven no barrier to battlefield courage. Promotion to master sergeant reflected his reputation. He never retreated. He never complained. He never abandoned wounded comrades. By early morning on that frigid January day, the situation had deteriorated beyond salvage. Enemy artillery had spent 2 days reducing buildings to broken stone and twisted metal. The battalion headquarters, established in what had been the town hall, prepared for emergency relocation as German forces closed the distance. The battalion commander faced an impossible choice. Evacuation required covering fire to protect headquarters personnel and wounded soldiers during withdrawal. Someone had to stay behind. The sergeant volunteered without hesitation when the call came. As darkness covered the battalion's movement to alternate positions, he remained alone in the command post. He checked ammunition supplies and prepared for what seemed certain to be his final battle. His heavy machine gun covered the main street leading to the town center. The weapon could fire hundreds of rounds per minute, but ammunition was limited to whatever remained in abandoned positions. Just before dawn, the first enemy patrol materialized from the shadows. 6 soldiers moved carefully through debris-filled streets. The sergeant allowed them to approach within 30 yards before triggering his weapon. 3 seconds of sustained fire dropped all 6 Germans to the ground. The street immediately erupted with return fire. Machine guns, rifles, and mortars concentrated on his position. Then the sergeant made a decision that defied military logic and survival instinct. He lifted his heavy weapon, carried it into the open street, and established a new firing position completely without cover. Exposed under the glow of burning buildings, he began engaging flanking forces that threatened to surround him. For 12 continuous hours, from early morning until late afternoon, he maintained this impossible position. Enemy fire from multiple directions never drove him from the street. Official records confirm this incredible defensive stand, despite overwhelming hostile firepower. As daylight faded, German forces brought forward armored support. A tank moved into position for direct fire at the lone defender. The first shell blast hurled him across the interior of his former shelter, but he returned immediately to his weapon. When enemy personnel carriers approached behind tank protection, he waited for infantry to dismount before opening fire. With the tank's main gun aimed directly at his window position, he eliminated more than half the attacking force. Moving his machine gun back inside, he secured it to furniture to maintain stability while firing through the window opening. The next wave of German infantry advanced with tank support, believing resistance had been eliminated. They walked into carefully planned fields of fire. Frustrated by this single stubborn defender, the tank commander ordered his vehicle to point-blank range. From 75 yards away, the tank fired directly into the command post. The explosion destroyed the machine gun and threw the sergeant violently across the room. Dazed and bleeding from multiple shrapnel wounds, he discovered grenades left behind during evacuation. When the next German squad approached the building, confident that tank fire had ended all resistance, he was ready with white phosphorus grenades. The intense burning chemical broke the enemy attack and forced withdrawal. But another tank moved even closer, firing repeatedly into his stronghold until walls collapsed and fires started throughout the building. Still, he fought back with whatever weapons remained available. By the second morning, the sergeant had neither slept nor eaten substantial food. Multiple wounds covered his body from explosions and flying metal fragments. His eyeglasses were cracked and held together with improvised repairs. German forces launched another massive assault with overwhelming numbers. Preparatory bombardment was devastating beyond description. The command post, already severely damaged, began total structural collapse. Walls fell inward, portions of the roof crashed down, and fires spread through multiple rooms. Official army histories confirm that resistance continued despite impossible conditions. He had switched to a standard infantry rifle, using ammunition gathered from casualties during brief pauses in fighting. For the next 12 hours, he became a phantom, appearing at different windows to fire several shots before moving to new positions. By midday, the original command post was completely untenable. German forces had advanced past his position and threatened the battalion's alternate headquarters 400 yards to the rear. Military records confirm his extraordinary decision to move to the alternate position to continue defensive operations. He discovered a damaged machine gun that had been abandoned during earlier fighting. Working under direct enemy fire, he performed field repairs and returned the weapon to operational status. When German forces launched what they believed would be the final assault, Devastating defensive fire met them in the narrow approach street. For 20 minutes, continuous firing prevented enemy advance until the attack was completely repelled. Official documentation confirms that through his individual actions, he killed at least 40 hostile soldiers and wounded many additional enemy personnel during extended combat against overwhelming numbers. By midnight of the second day, he had fought continuously for more than 48 hours. The medal citation explicitly confirms this duration without rest or relief, repeatedly escaping death by the narrowest possible margins. Just after midnight, American armored reinforcements finally broke through German lines to reach the town. Enemy forces, caught between relief columns and stubborn town defenders, began withdrawing from their positions. When relief troops entered the alternate command post, they discovered the sergeant still at his fighting position. He was barely conscious, covered in blood and powder burns, but refused to leave until properly relieved by incoming personnel. Dawn revealed the full extent of individual defensive action that had stopped elements from 2 elite German divisions. Officers from division headquarters arrived to investigate incredible reports from front-line units. Official records confirmed at least 40 enemy soldiers killed, with significantly more wounded. The 1st Battalion had begun the battle with 33 officers and over 700 enlisted soldiers. Only 11 officers and 253 enlisted men remained combat effective when fighting ended. German regimental commanders later wrote about the fierce resistance encountered, describing it as among the hardest and most costly battles ever fought on the Western Front. The defending sergeant was evacuated to field hospital facilities for treatment of multiple shrapnel wounds, burns, and concussion effects from repeated explosions. Medical personnel treated significant weight loss from his 2-day ordeal. His hands required extensive treatment for burns from handling overheated weapon components. During recovery, fellow soldiers visited to meet the man who had single-handedly stopped a German offensive. He consistently minimized his actions, insisting he had simply performed expected duties. Nearly 1 year later, at a White House ceremony, the president presented him with the Medal of Honor. 5 other recipients shared the ceremony, with senior military commanders specifically requesting to meet the sergeant whose actions had become legendary throughout the European theater. The president emphasized during the ceremony that this soldier represented America's finest qualities: determination to stand for principles regardless of overwhelming opposition. The official citation published in War Department orders described his extreme gallantry while defending command posts against powerful enemy forces that had overrun main defensive positions. Following military discharge, he received presidential appointment as a Veterans Administration representative. His initial assignment in Chicago involved helping returning soldiers navigate bureaucratic procedures to secure earned benefits. Later transfer to San Francisco continued this crucial work for over a decade. He specialized in assisting disabled veterans and those struggling with combat-related psychological trauma. Personal experience provided unique insight into their challenges and obstacles. Former colleagues remembered his tenacious advocacy for veterans' benefits, displaying the same determination shown during combat. When leaving government service, he established a landscaping business that became successful through identical determination displayed at war. He accepted difficult projects others considered impossible, transforming rocky terrain into beautiful gardens. Employees recalled incredible work ethic, often laboring 12-hour days without complaint. Physical demands of outdoor work seemed to provide purpose and peace after traumatic war experiences. Marriage brought stability and understanding after earlier personal difficulties. Their son would later serve with distinction during Vietnam, earning combat decorations for his own courage under fire. The family tradition of military service continued into the next generation, when his grandson served during Gulf War operations. 3 generations had answered their nation's call to military service. Advanced lung cancer diagnosis came in early 1966. He approached the disease with characteristic determination, researching treatments and maintaining rigorous medical schedules. This battle proved beyond human determination to overcome. Death came at a veterans' hospital in California during summer 1966. He was 49 years old when cancer claimed what enemy fire could not. Burial with full military honors took place at a national cemetery near San Francisco. Over 500 people attended funeral services, including veterans, family members, friends, and military officials. His former division sent an honor guard for final ceremonies. The eulogy emphasized not only battlefield heroism, but continued service to fellow veterans after the war. His former battalion commander delivered remarks emphasizing that one individual can make historical difference. When logic demanded retreat, when survival instinct urged flight, when overwhelming force suggested surrender, this sergeant simply refused. Military historians extensively study the battle, particularly individual defensive actions that contributed to German offensive failure. Enemy divisions bloodied during town fighting never recovered full combat effectiveness for remaining war operations. Army analysis of defensive actions became teaching material for infantry schools. Tactics including mobility within fixed positions, fire discipline, and maintaining effectiveness, despite wounds and exhaustion, became instructional points for future officers. Official Army history notes that town defense represented American infantry at its finest performance level. Individual soldiers demonstrated that determined defenders in prepared positions could stop even elite enemy formations. Modern documentary productions have featured his story for new generations through streaming services. Military records, expert analysis, and dramatic recreation reconstructed those crucial 48 hours for contemporary audiences. Current division officers appearing in documentaries emphasize that individual actions transcend historical periods. True military strength comes not from technology or numbers, but from individual soldiers who refuse surrender when circumstances suggest they should. Recently declassified after-action reports revealed additional details confirming devastating casualties inflicted by single defender. German unit records showed losses normally associated with entire platoon resistance, not individual soldier actions. The French town rebuilt after war destruction has maintained memory of American defenders. Anniversary commemorations on battle dates draw visitors from across Europe and America to honor those who fought there. Memorial plaques in multiple languages recognize sacrifice made for French freedom. Annual awards within military units honor soldiers displaying similar initiative and courage under adverse conditions. These recognitions serve as reminders that individual courage retains importance on modern battlefields despite technological changes. Official battle statistics documented in military records include duration of continuous combat exceeding 48 hours, confirmed enemy casualties of at least 40 soldiers killed with many more wounded, and strategic impact preventing breakthrough that could have collapsed entire defensive sector. Personal cost included multiple shrapnel wounds, burns from overheated weapons, concussion effects from direct tank fire, and long-term psychological trauma that affected him throughout remaining life years. Today, his legacy continues through foundation work, providing scholarships for veterans' children, and funding research into combat-related psychological disorders. Educational programs have helped hundreds of students attend college, while advancing understanding of war's mental health impact. Military training facilities use historical scenarios based on his defensive actions to challenge officer candidates. Training emphasizes position selection, fire discipline, and maintaining combat effectiveness under extreme stress conditions. Museums in France maintain permanent exhibits about the battle, with sections dedicated to individual defensive actions drawing thousands of annual visitors. Interactive displays and historical testimonies bring events to life for new generations of learners. Post-war veteran advocacy work, though less documented than combat service, proved equally important for thousands of returning soldiers. Administrative work helping veterans access benefits through government bureaucracy required same determination displayed during combat operations. Former colleagues remembered someone who refused to accept denial when fighting for veteran benefits. Personal combat experience provided credibility that no civilian administrator could challenge when advocating for disabled or traumatized veterans. Congressional testimony about improved mental health services for combat veterans contributed to expanded psychological care in military hospitals. Though modern terminology didn't exist, he understood invisible wounds of warfare and their long-term effects on soldiers. French civilian casualties and property damage during battle fighting made American defensive efforts even more significant. Local historians emphasize that determined defense prevented even greater destruction that would have occurred from larger battles if German forces had achieved breakthrough objectives. International military academies study the battle as example of defensive warfare principles. Key lessons include individual initiative importance, psychological impact of determined resistance, effectiveness of mobility within defensive positions, and critical nature of position selection for defensive success. Modern infantry training incorporates lessons from individual defensive actions, like his 48-hour stand. Current doctrine emphasizes prepared positions with multiple firing points, individual weapons proficiency, psychological impact of determined resistance, and mental resilience training for extreme stress situations. Special operations units analyze historical examples of soldiers holding positions against overwhelming odds for insights into human performance under extreme conditions. Training programs attempt to build mental toughness displayed by exceptional individual defenders. While military technology continues advancing, fundamental importance of individual courage and determination remains constant across all historical periods. Modern commanders emphasize that despite technological advantages, warfare ultimately depends on individual soldiers making difficult decisions under extreme stress. Anniversary commemorations continue drawing military personnel, historians, and civilian visitors to battle sites. Walking the ground where impossible defensive actions occurred helps new generations understand what individual determination can accomplish against overwhelming opposition. Veterans from recent conflicts find inspiration in historical examples of soldiers who refused surrender despite logical reasons to quit. Understanding of close-quarters urban combat from personal experience helps them appreciate tactical and psychological challenges faced by defenders. Universal appeal of exceptional individual courage stories transcends generational boundaries because core values remain constant. Duty, sacrifice, determination, and courage under extreme adversity represent timeless human qualities that inspire across all historical periods. His story demonstrates that heroism doesn't require fearlessness, but rather performing necessary actions despite fear. Extraordinary achievement comes not from superhuman abilities, but from refusing surrender when quitting would be understandable. Glory-seeking isn't heroism. Protecting those who depend on you defines true courage. 48 hours of individual defensive action against overwhelming enemy forces represents one of most extraordinary single-soldier stands in American military history. Statistical evidence documented in official records speaks clearly about individual achievement that defied military logic and probability calculations. Beyond impressive numbers, lies deeper truth about individual courage, making historical difference. One person's determination overcame seemingly impossible odds through absolute commitment to duty, regardless of personal cost or survival probability. Current military technology, including unmanned systems and cyber warfare, hasn't eliminated relevance of individual courage under extreme circumstances. Fundamental combat challenges including fear, exhaustion, and choice between self-preservation versus duty remain constant across technological advancement. Military leaders emphasize that despite technological progress, warfare ultimately requires individual soldiers making critical decisions under extreme stress. Historical examples provide benchmarks for decision-making processes when logic suggests different choices. How one man held hundreds of enemy soldiers for 48 hours continues challenging military analysts despite extensive study. Ability to maintain accuracy with damaged eyeglasses, physical endurance beyond normal human limits, and mental clarity despite extreme exhaustion remain remarkable even with modern performance understanding. Perhaps explanation lies not in tactical analysis or physiological capabilities, but in simpler concept of absolute commitment. Once decision was made to hold position, everything else, including pain, fear, and exhaustion, became secondary considerations to that fundamental commitment. His complete life story encompasses more than 48 hours of combat heroics. Childhood, marked by poverty and family loss, determination to serve despite physical limitations, courage facing impossible combat odds, commitment to continued veteran service after war, and quiet dignity of someone who never sought public recognition. Each element contributes to understanding not just battlefield actions, but character formation that made such actions possible. Ordinary American background responding to history's call with extraordinary courage when circumstances demanded exceptional individual performance. Final analysis reveals story significance beyond individual battlefield courage. It demonstrates heroism capacity existing in unexpected places and circumstances. It shows individual determination power to affect major historical outcomes. It illustrates freedom's price and willingness of some to pay that cost. He died believing duty performance was simply expected behavior. Historical judgment reaches different conclusions about significance of individual actions during critical 48-hour period. During those hours, he became more than individual soldier. He was the defensive line itself, the boundary between enemy victory and Allied containment. German forces expected normal defensive positions with typical defenders. Instead, they encountered something transcending military logic and probability. They found someone who absolutely would not yield ground, regardless of opposition strength or personal cost. When historians analyze decisive historical moments, focus usually centers on major battles involving thousands of participants. But sometimes, history pivots on smaller actions. Sometimes it depends on one person saying, "Enemy advance stops here." At a small French town in January 1945, one American sergeant made that declaration. For 48 hours that should have been impossible. Against odds-defying calculation, facing forces that should have overwhelmed individual resistance within minutes, he made his declaration true. The defensive line held. German forces couldn't believe resistance continuation then. Studying evidence and considering achievement impossibility, we can barely believe it now, but evidence remains irrefutable, testimony overwhelming, and impact undeniable. One sergeant, one machine gun, 48 hours, at least 40 enemy soldiers killed. It shouldn't have been possible, but he didn't know that. Or if he did, he didn't care. He had assigned duty, and he performed it. That's what heroes do.